All right, welcome. We have Jameson and Fantasy Fling on the Fantasy Fling channel. We are looking at the Turkey Day DFS slate. Jameson, how we doing?
Doing good. Honestly, one of the best DFS slates of the year. I think this is always a favorite of mine. Do a little turkey, do a little football, do a little gambling. I'm looking forward to it, and I feel like this slate is one of the better Thanksgiving slates that we've had in a long time. So I'm really looking forward to it. Got some teams that we'll go over. We got some injury news, all that good stuff. But I'm excited for it. I'm happy to be on do it.
Me too, man. Glad to have you here. Glad to be talking Turkey Day slate and, you know, have fun with it. Don't tilt in front of your family. Save that for Sunday.
Yep.
That's a Sunday tradition. Okay.
Yeah, we're just here having fun, of course. But I feel like I've loaded up. Playing more of a tournament mindset. I know
hmm
you've played this as a cash game thing, but my
Yeah.
mindset is tournaments this week. Do think there's a couple different edges. Try to get a little bit different on a slate like this. A lot of it's going to be the same straightforward stuff. But I do think there's a couple different ways to get around some ownership and stuff like that. But first and foremost, just have fun with it. The last thing you want to do is be melting down in front of your relatives you only see a couple times out of the year.
Precisely. And, it's a little bit of skin in the game while you sit there on the couch and stuff your face and, have a couple of drinks or whatever it is you do on Turkey Day. So, yeah, it's meant to be fun. And, we're going to get into it. We're going to start with the game tiles. And then we're just going to talk a little bit about just like general strategy for these kind of slates because it's really kind of a hybrid between a showdown, which me and Jameson do every week, showdown show, and the main slate. So, three gamer is what we're going to be looking at. And let's go ahead and I'm going to share the screen real quick and we will get right into the games that we are going to be looking at. Um, I'm going to go over the game tiles. This is loaded over at a DFS Army's domination station. So, Jameson, we got three game tiles right here. Obviously, the Washington at Dallas game, that is the highest game total. And, Green Bay and Detroit's right behind it, of course. But Dallas has the highest implied team total on the slate. And, typically what we've seen from them this year is in these spots, they deliver a lot of good fantasy goodness.
Yep, and especially against the Commanders' defense has just been really bad.
hmm
We've seen Mike McCarthy, especially in the past, and he's starting to do it again this year. The pass
hmm
rate over expectation, Dak Prescott, especially in these smash matchups to where they can kind of go nuclear. This is obviously one of the best spots for them this entire year going up against the Commanders' secondary. And another thing, too, the Cowboys' defense, you're just going to have to kind of see where ownership lands. I expect that the Dallas offense probably is the most owned as far as this 3 game slate goes, and rightfully so. I mean, this is probably the best matchup out of all of them. But Dak's obviously in a good spot. CD Lamb has been on a tear the last month or so kind of working around that.
Right.
For cash games, I'd say for a lot of people, you're probably going to play that side, and then for tournaments, I'm kind of looking to get a little different. But that's the one that sticks out there for me.
Absolutely. And, this game, I think, really has, I think Vegas kind of nailed it with the high scoring game because, Washington, as you just mentioned, their defense is bad. It's been bad. And, they traded their two best pass rushers away. And Sam Howell throws the ball all over the field. He has 442 passing attempts on the season, which is 60 higher than the second place, Josh Allen. So he really has been slinging it all over the field. And obviously, we've seen with the Cowboys, even when they get up big in games, they will continue to throw. So obviously, prefer the Dak side in this game. Love CD Lamb. To a lesser degree, you could play Pollard and all the other pass catchers, but those are obviously the guys that you like the most on the Dallas side.
Yep.
And then Sam Howell, yeah, like I said, that's a low team total, and typically you're not going to want to target that. But if you want to be contrarian, and we'll look at ownership here in a second, but I think some Howell stacks are certainly a good way to attack this slate. Um, And, just overall strategy, I'm not afraid to kind of overstack one game, because if you overstack one game and that game is the one that goes off, like, you have a really good chance of having a great day. What are your thoughts on that?
Yep. Absolutely. I do want to point out a couple things on this Dallas game real quick.
Mhm.
I think the last 11 Thanksgiving games, the Dallas Cowboys have not covered. I think that's the stat I saw from Jake Seeley.
I saw that.
Um, so, which is kind of interesting. I'm not saying, it'll happen here, but just kind of something of interest. And then I believe Sam Howell's over under on, throws, I think is like 38 or 39. So
Yeah.
when we've seen with Washington, the minute that they get behind, Eric Bieniemy just like throws the run game out the window and automatically starts chucking it. And we've seen that scenario. So especially in this 3-game DFS slate, Sam Howell will be one of the more under-owned quarterbacks just because we got a couple in better spots. But I do like him as far as the GPP goes. Like, you can do the Sam Howell stack if you think they can keep up, and then play the
Mhm.
Dallas pass catchers, if that makes sense, and kind of get, like you said, your concentrated game there. And it's a little bit contrarian from the Dak Prescott stacks.
Yeah, I like it too. It's contrarian, and the Sam House stacks are cheap, right? So you can hit CD Lamb on the other side. You could probably play like a Christian McCaffrey. Could play like an expensive piece of another game too. So yeah, I certainly like that as well.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, the other high game total obviously is the Detroit Lions. They have a 27.25 implied team total, and really the only problem with the Detroit Lions is the vulture ability of David Montgomery and Jameer Gibbs. You got two really good running backs, and I think you you need to play both of them. I'm not so sure about playing both in the same lineup, but those are kind of the guys that kind of kill Goff for me. But on a 3-game slate, Goff could still be the nuts.
Yeah, absolutely. On the Green Bay side, there's a lot of injuries to go through, and to be
Hmm.
quite honest, we don't have all the answers. I do know that Luke Musgrave's going to be out.
Yeah.
Tucker Kraft will be a more of a punt tight end. I feel like he's going to get a lot of ownership. I get
Hmm.
it, especially on DraftKings. I think I'm open to double tight end. That's more doable on DraftKings than FanDuel. But like I said, to get different in these 3-game slates that we don't see very often outside of obviously Thanksgiving, I do think double tight end over on FanDuel it's not optimal, but I do think I'd be open to it to try to get in some of these hammers like Christian McCaffrey, CD Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, that sort of stuff. But I do want to just say real quick, it's not going to be optimal either, but Jameer Gibbs and David Montgomery in the same lineup, if you want to get really different, I'd say probably in large field tournaments, if you think both of them can get there. I don't hate having both of them in the same lineup. I think that's a way to kind of get contrarian here too.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen it obviously in the past where these small slates you'll kind of get two running backs in the same lineup. Obviously,
Yep.
this is something that is very specific to a showdown slate, or a 3-game slate, right? 2-game slate, 3-game slate. You're not going to do that in a 10 to 12 game slate. But yeah, it could certainly happen. It could certainly happen, specifically with a game that really goes off. If that game is a shootout, that's probably going to be the likely scenario, specifically with Jameer Gibbs getting the amount of targets he's been getting as of late. I think he's about 15% target share last week. So certainly getting enough, I think, to be in consideration. And it's, large field GBP, I think it's going to be quite contrarian. So
I will say one more thing on the Lions. They are the
mhm.
most run heavy team when they get in the red zone. And we've seen now that Jameer Gibbs has kind of taken over the workload, that both of these guys can get there. They'll kind of even each other out and they'll take turns as far as red zone. We've seen Jameer Gibbs kind of take some red zone stuff, but then we saw David Montgomery in the 2-minute drill last week. So it's really been flip flopping back and forth. So if you think both of them can fall into the end zone, if you think, Jameer Gibbs kind of gets the receiving work, and then David Montgomery kind of gets the touchdowns, it works out that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we'll get into running backs here in a minute, but outside of Christian McCaffrey and Tony Pollard and Brian Robinson, it's pretty ugly at running back. So, we got some value guys, but the matchups are not good. So, running back, I think, could definitely be the make or break for you on this slate. The last game, speaking of Christian McCaffrey, the last game we do have is San Francisco going against Seattle. San Francisco, they have that 25.5 implied team total. They are about 7-point favorites going against Seattle. So, we saw it last week. Even when Christian McCaffrey doesn't have a smash game, Brock Purdy can get it done because he had so many weapons, Kittle, Ayuk, and, Deebo Samuel as well.
Yeah. And honestly, the 49ers game is probably going to be my favorite. I'm really in on the 49ers. I think it's definitely going to get some ownership just because of the slate, but I think a lot of people are going to gravitate to Dallas. And I do see a way that, we've seen the 49ers offense just kind of get 30 points and everybody kind of gets there. George Kittle, over the last month, he's had over 400 yards in the last 4 games. A little bit way to get different, and then all the pass catchers. Ayuk has been really good. Daniel's coming back, he gets some rushing stuff, and then Christian McCaffrey, who's the cheapest he's been like in a month and a half at 9,800 compared to his like 10K or 10.3 over on FanDuel. And then Brock Purdy, he's been really good outside of like the 2 games a month ago where he had the concussion and stuff. But I do like this game, and then the Seahawks side, I don't love too much of it. And we'll kind of get into, like you said, the running backs there with Charbonnet because we'll have to talk about him, especially at his price point. But I think the 49ers game is the one I'm going to be most interested in, and we'll get into that here, obviously, in a couple minutes. But I think that's pretty fun way to get a little different.
Yeah, definitely love that. I think Christian McCaffrey obviously is the standout. And, really, when you see a guy like Christian McCaffrey, specifically on a slate this small, you're like, there's a couple ways it can go. Christian McCaffrey smashes and you have him and you win all the monies, or you don't have him and you lose, or obviously you take that shot that you're going to full fade someone of his caliber. And if he gets hurt in the first quarter, or, all the touchdowns go to Ayuk and Deebo and Kittle, then, you've just leveraged the field, obviously. So he's obviously the most likely to smash on this slate, but comes with some risk because of his salary. But like you said, he's going to be the cheapest that he's been in a long time. So we certainly like that. But let's go ahead and get into the positions. Now, one thing I will say when you're building, I've done a lot of, playing like XFL and USFL, which is like the smaller slates, the 2 to 3 game, 4 games is actually pretty much what they did every week. And just kind of looked at a lot of afternoon slates. I played quite a bit of those too here in the NFL this year. So one thing to keep in mind with these afternoon slates is you're obviously don't worry so much about total ownership. It's going to be a lot higher than it would on a main slate. So you still want to find, a contrarian play here and there, but just know that to find like a 10% contrarian play, probably not going to happen, right? You're looking for like a guy's under 20% essentially, 15%, kind of that sweet spot. Secondly, like don't be afraid to play tight end in the flex. You really have to look for ways to differentiate your lineup. And kind of as Jameson just talked about a few minutes ago, you could play both the running backs in a same game. You have to be willing to play running backs and players against the defense, like 2 to 3 sometimes. That is something that's kind of like a big no-no on a main slate, but you have to allow for it on these small slates.
Yeah, you just there's not much of an edge, especially in GPPs, unless you're shooting for these like long dart throws that, catch a touchdown. Some of these like real cheap wide receivers, say like Washington, you don't obviously know, Terry McLaurin's the number 1, but he's not necessarily the number 1. It ends up being Dotson one week. It ends up being, Curtis Samuel or Logan Thomas. It just, outside of hitting on those dart throws, kind of the lineup itself just kind of getting a little bit different. Like I said, the double running back for the Lions is definitely a way to get different, and then double tight end too. So I definitely agree there.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and get into it. Jameson, who is like kind of your top pay up option for quarterback? Who's a guy that maybe isn't your top option, but you'll have a good amount of exposure to. Who do you like at quarterback on this 3-game slate?
I would say if you're playing cash, I think Dak Prescott's got to be the cash just because of just because of the matchup there, the pass rate over expectation. The last month they have just absolutely picked apart these, not so good teams. We've seen Dallas, when they play in, you know, worse competition, they just absolutely have these blow up spots. So it's going to be Dak there. I really like Brock Purdy. I think he's going to come with a little bit of ownership, but like I said, I'm really on the San Francisco side. I think he's been really good. And then Jared Goff would end up being number 3. I don't love Jared Goff, and then my only other dart throw would be Sam Howell. I wanted to play Jordan Love, but with all these injuries to his, receiving core, Musgrave's going to be out, Aaron Jones is out. I thought he would be able to kind of keep up with Detroit's defense, but with all the injuries, I just don't want to play him, and I'm not going to play Geno. He hasn't been good outside of facing Washington. He had a big second half against him. I think he's worth it in large field. I think that'd be the way to get different. I don't think anybody's going to play Geno Smith, even in large field, to be quite honest. I think he could see under 10%, but just with the injury stuff. But I think that's where I would go. I think Dak and Cash, and then Brock Purdy would be my second favorite.
I like that. And I'm with you with Dak and Cash. In fact, DFS Army's projections have Dak Prescott as the highest owned, 25%. And as far as the other quarterbacks, I mean, no one's really running away with anything here as far as like ownership. So that's kind of surprising to me. I'm curious to see how this updates tomorrow. But yeah, Dak is the highest right now at 25%. And then Brock Purdy just behind him. And then Sam Howell is actually kind of looking a little contrarian at 12%. So, and specifically in cash games, these are like huge for me as, just making my decisions, who's the safer play, just being able to have these ownership numbers. So by the way, if you want to try a DFS Army subscription right now, they are doing BF 2023 for 50% off for Black Friday. So get access to all that stuff. Pretty sweet.
Definitely worth the money. So go check that out. Especially while you get a little discount, and then it helps you win some more money. It'll pay itself off pretty quickly.
Absolutely. But I'm with you on Hal. He's my contrarian play this week. Some Hal stacks at 12%, and I'm with you on Geno too. I've tried to talk myself into Geno because San Francisco's hard to run on, and it's gonna be a pass funnel. But he's a little banged up and just hasn't done it this year. So I think I would rather take some shots with Jordan Love a little bit and Sam Howell a little more than a little bit. So those would be my two contrarian guys. But I think Dak will be the guy that I will have the most of. And then, I will probably a little under on Goff and even with the field on Purdy.
Yep. I will say this. I'm very interested to see how Jared Goff's ownership comes out tomorrow because I do, they're playing at Ford Field, which is, Coors Field of the NFL. He's obviously been much better at home than he has been on the road. And I can see a spot where Jared Goff gets there and he brings, like, say, Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery, just because Green Bay is so beat up, especially on offense. They might not be able to move the ball. And then on defense, too, I know they're a run funnel. I really like David Montgomery tomorrow, but I do think that you could play Jared Goff and then with one of the running backs, and it can get there with Amon-Ra. Like I said, I just don't think Green Bay's defense is very good. So I'm interested to see where Jared Goff's ownership is because I definitely will play a little bit of him. But that's I didn't want that to go kind of under the radar there. I do like him. I just like some other people better.
Yeah, for me, if Jared Goff came in low owned, I would be all over it. I just think the fact that, he's right around Dak and Purdy, it's going to be hard for me to play him because of the vulture, ability of two running backs, not just one, but two. Now, he could throw to Gibbs. He could throw a screen. He takes it to the house. Gibbs is obviously a pass catching running back. But Goff could definitely be the nuts. They have a 27-point implied team total. So it's definitely possible.
Yep. I will say one other thing. The Detroit defense has not been very good. Like I said, I wish that Green Bay's pass catchers were more healthy, and we'll kind of see how it ends up popping up. If you want to do the stars and scrubs approach, you can play
Hmm.
Jordan Love and you can stack them with Watson, with Reed, with Tucker Craft. I wouldn't do all of them, but you can end up fitting, Christian McCaffrey, Amon Ra, CD Lamb that way. And just in case, if Detroit and Green Bay kind of gets in a shootout, Jordan Love kind of pays off. And then, if the other hammers hit, that was the way to kind of fit all of your guys in there just
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah. Like, last week I did in the Millie Maker, did like a cheap DTR stack, just with a bunch of studs like around it. You know what I mean? And we kind of saw like Brock Purdy won the Millie Maker unsacked, which was just nuts. But I think the general idea with something like that is you can go with a cheap quarterback, and now and he's a cheap pass catching option to make the stack work, and then you can load up on studs like Amon Ra and CD Lamb and Christian McCaffrey and all that. So I think that's highly likely that we see that win on this slate if Dak doesn't have a 30-point performance.
Yeah. I will say, just if you think try to kind of get away, because we obviously are building our teams kind of around this Dallas ownership. In tournaments, let's say even if Dak goes for 300 yards, but say Tony Pollard gets 2 touchdowns and the touchdowns aren't there for Dak Prescott, that's kind of a way to get around the
Right.
CD, Dak Prescott ownership. Just kind of a way to kind of get away from it. But I mean, the matchup's really good. It's the best one on the slate, so I don't want to full fade it, then get burned, and then, obviously don't have a chance at anything.
100%. And speaking of running backs, let's kind of jump right into it. Christian McCaffrey is obviously the top dog. He's the top pay up option for me. He has a really good rating. His projection is about 8 points higher than the next guy, Tony Pollard, and for good reason. Obviously, Seattle, they're not bad against the run, but they're just about average. And obviously, Christian McCaffrey, we've seen him even in these spots where he's going against a really good run defense, he'll still score 20 points. So if there's a flag plant for me on this slate, it's probably going to be Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, it's just really hard to get away from him, and I think unless he gets injured, you're really playing with fire. Because I mean, I've played him the last couple weeks in DFS, and even though he hasn't necessarily gone off, his floor is like 20 points. Just the receiving, the touchdown stuff. I mean, you are really asking for it to full fade him and kind of put a lot of pressure elsewhere, unless you're playing both Amon Ra and CD and they both go off. It's really hard to get, especially in cash. I really would not get away from CMC and cash, but if you want to try to get different in tournaments, if you're playing the Brock Purdy stack, I would be playing him with McCaffrey. I've done it every time in DFS and it works out because they both get there.
Yeah, because Christian McCaffrey's seeing about 5-6 targets a week at least, and he had he had a 41% target share last week. He's got a 20% target share on the season, which is just nuts.
Kind of crazy. Kind of crazy.
Yeah. So,
but the rest of this running back position, I mean, there's really not a whole lot there. Interested to see if Antonio Gibson will play tomorrow. If he does play, especially if the Washington Commanders get down the 2-minute drill stuff, they play Gibson over Brian Robinson. But other than that, Zach Charbonnet, I think he's a good play, especially over on FanDuel. He's like 5,600, I believe. He's a punt. I know it's not the best matchup, but you just kind of bet on volume there. We've got Tony Pollard, AJ Dillon. I really do not have any interest, and I think he's questionable. And then you've got
he's also terrible.
Yeah,
he's questionably terrible.
I wasn't trying to kill the guy, but I do that off the camera, but we can do it on. He's just I can't do. If he beats me tomorrow, so be it. But I'm not going to play AJ Dillon. And then we've got both Lions running backs, which we've talked about. Other than that, I mean, there is really not much as far as the running back goes, unless I've missed one.
No, yeah, you're right. Well, and here's the thing too with AJ Dillon is Detroit has a good run defense. So,
Yeah.
um, it's a bad matchup. He hasn't looked good. He's questionable. I'd be more likely to play the backup than I would AJ
Yeah.
Dillon, just based on the discount.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's either going to be Patrick Taylor or
yeah,
James Robinson,
yeah,
depending on how that works out. But I mean, AJ Dillon can have 20 rushes; he can end up having like 40 yards. I mean, the volume
yeah.
it doesn't matter. He just sucks.
Yeah, and I'm with you there. Just kind of overall roster construction. I really feel that if Christian McCaffrey, he's 8,700, so you know the optimal lineup is probably going to see Christian McCaffrey, and then it's going to see like a one of these 5K running backs. And for me, the other guy, like if there's no Antonio Gibson, I'm probably just going to lock in Brian Robinson. I'll probably have him in every single lineup because he's catching passes as well.
Nope.
I think he caught like 5 or 6 targets last week. So, there's a little bit of a floor there. Yeah, he had 14% target share last week. So I love Brian Robinson here in this spot to like pair with Christian McCaffrey. Pollard, I just don't know on Pollard. He did look good last week. I think I'll have some Pollard, but not going to be over the field with him like I was last week. In a perfect matchup, like he should have smashed, and he still didn't smash. Like you didn't have to have his points, right?
Right.
So
I will. I will say I think, especially in cash, I think the Christian McCaffrey, I'd say Tony Pollard, Jahmyr Gibbs is probably going to be what you're going to see a lot of.
mhm.
I feel like a lot of people are going to punt at Tucker Craft at the tight end position, and then you can kind of build around that way. I
Yeah,
don't love Tony Pollard tomorrow. I would rather go elsewhere. I'm really in on David Montgomery. I think a lot of people are going to go to Jahmyr Gibbs, and rightfully so. Um, but I think a lot of people are discounting what David Montgomery. Both these guys are like top 12 running backs as far as fantasy goes the rest of the year, and I think that they can both get there. Um, but I see a spot where David Montgomery can get like 2 touchdowns, goes under owned compared to Jahmyr Gibbs, and kind of goes that way. So I'm really in on him. As far as ownership and then just the play itself, I think he's in a really good spot against the Packers, who he's owned in the past.
yeah, for sure. And both Dallas and Washington are pretty just average against the run. So, I totally see playing Pollard and Brian Robinson. Both of them could certainly get there, but I'm with you on the David Montgomery going against Green Bay and, Gibbs. Honestly, if it was just one of these guys, it would be just kind of a lock butt for me because,
Yeah.
Green Bay is not good against the run. So I think, that's the way to play it. You just got to play both of them. And honestly, I'll probably be even with the field on both of these guys. I'll try to avoid having them in the same lineup. But other than that, I like them both, certainly.
Yep.
And, Charbonnet, I could see him getting there just on targets, but it's really not a great matchup. And he is actually the third highest projected owned on this slate. So I'm probably going to be under the field on Charbonnet just because I feel like Ryan Robinson isn't that much cheaper or isn't that much more expensive. So, I'm more likely to just kind of lock in Brian Robinson if there's no Antonio Gibson.
Yeah, I will say on FanDuel, Charbonnet ends up being 5,800,
Mm-hmm.
and Brian Robinson ends up being 6,700. If you have the money, I'd probably rather play Robinson, but I do think a lot of people are going to play Charbonnet. I think it's fine. I'd rather play Charbonnet than AJ Dillon if that helps you unlock stuff. But as far as him breaking the slate, I don't think this is the matchup for it. But like I said, if there's very limited spots to kind of opening up salary elsewhere, so I don't hate to play just based on volume. We've seen that plenty of times in DFS. We get like a backup running back. He ends up getting 20 touches. He, maybe falls into the end zone, kind of pays himself off, and that's kind of how it works.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like that. Well, Jameson, let's go ahead and move on to wide receivers. So who are you looking at this week? Who do you like?
Obviously, CD Lamb is in the smash spot
Mm-hmm.
of a lifetime. Just the volume, the workload. I also like
Matchup.
Brandon Cooks, the matchup. I really like Brandon Cooks as well, his partner in crime. I think he's going to be a little bit underowned. He's a little bit cheaper. We've seen him have the blow up spot too, especially if you think Dak's going to get the ball around to everywhere. But obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown's is in a good spot. He's kind of like Cooper Kupp light, where he ends up getting so many targets, it pays off just that way. Even though I'm not sure if Green Bay is going to push Detroit, and we can see Detroit just kind of sit on the ball and run it, unlike Dallas, where Dallas will just keep throwing the ball. So if I had to pick between the two of those, I'd probably say CeeDee Lamb. And then, the Washington pass catchers, they're kind of Russian roulette. You just kind of pick one. I'm really not confident on any of those. I'm not going to play much of the Seattle side, like I said, so I'm not interested in a whole lot of those wide receivers. And then I think I will play a Green Bay wide receiver. I just do not know which one yet until we see the injury stuff. I think if Jaden Reed plays, I think he'd be one of my favorite plays on the slate.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on Jaden Reed. CeeDee Lamb for me is, I mean, that it's a dream matchup. Washington actually gives up almost 60 yards above what an average defense gives up to the pass. So, CeeDee Lamb could not be in a better spot. And he's currently second in the NFL in receiving yards, just behind Tyreek Hill. The amount of targets he's had, he's top 10. The past month of the season, he's number 1 by about 7 targets. So he's just been on an unreal tear. And, I think right now I'm seeing him for about 30% projected ownership and 40. And I will certainly be quite a bit higher than that on this slate.
I do want to say just real quick on just the Washington pass defense. They just got lit up by Tommy DeVito and Darius Slayton.
Dude.
So if you want any context on how bad it is, that's why it's so hard to get away from this Dallas pass catching, even at the ownership. I mean, if you're getting lit up by Tommy DeVito, it's just I can't imagine what Dallas is going to do.
Couldn't agree more. Kind of pissed at myself because last week I was looking at Saquon Barkley at 2% ownership, and I was like, I get it. They're terrible, and it's probably going to be a horrible game script. I'm like, but are we forgetting that Washington has a terrible defense? What if the Giants come out and Barkley just has a game? And that's exactly what he did. So
I'm surprised he was 2%. I'm surprised anybody clicked the button, honestly.
Yeah.
That's But I do want to say we'll get into some of these cheap wide receivers before we move off here. I think Jameson Williams is in a really interesting spot. He's kind of been a little kind of integrated more into the Lions offense. Dan Campbell came out this week and said he was part of the herd. They're hoping to get a little bit more of him. He's very cheap, especially over on FanDuel. He can obviously catch, a long one and kind of pay his salary off that way. I do think he's interesting. I don't think he's a volume play, but I do think, if he catches a 60-yard bomb, he pays off his salary. I'd rather play him than some of these other cheap guys and, kind of take the risk there. I think Christian Watson is in a nice spot. I don't love him just because he hasn't done very much. He caught a touchdown to kind of save what looked like a pretty bad game last week, but as far as that goes, I think he's cheap and in a good spot too. But I think Jameson Williams, like I said, I'm interested to see where his ownership is, but I do like him, and I will be playing a little bit of him tomorrow.
Yeah, I like that. Goff, obviously, Amon-Ra is, the main stacking piece. And I do like Amon-Ra, but it is a little bit of a tougher matchup this week. When comparing him to CeeDee Lamb, and really that's the way you have to compare it because he's 8,500 and so is CeeDee Lamb. So, you're going to have to make, assuming you don't play Christian McCaffrey and you pay down at quarterback, that is basically the scenario where you can fit CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra. And, and it might be a viable one, right? To kind of fade for that roster construction, that type of build to kind of fade McCaffrey and just play the 2 top wide receivers. But yeah, other than that, if you're just doing one expensive wide receivers, Lamb is clearly the guy in this matchup, head and shoulders above Amon-Ra on this slate. So I like the fact that you can play Lamb and then, maybe take some shots on Jameson Williams as a direct leverage play off of Amon-Ra, who's projected for like 35% ownership. So I really like that call. As far as Dak stacks, which, Dak, as we established, is the best quarterback on the slate. The other guy that I really like is Brandon Cooks. He has a 22% target share last week. He's been coming along the past few weeks. I think obviously 2 weeks ago, he smashed in the winning Millie Maker lineup. It was, I think, Dak, CeeDee Lamb, and Brandon Cooks.
Yep. So I like him too. I will say, just kind of looking at the slate, I think that a lot of the mid-tier wide receivers are going to go overlooked because a lot of people are going to do the stars and scrubs approach.
Yeah.
Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. Brandon Ayuk has obviously been kind of the better play. I know there's the myth that, against zone, it's Deebo, and then against man, it's Brandon Ayuk. I think that's a little fluky, but I do think them, and then, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, they're probably not going to get clicked. But those are some mid-tier guys that I think will go kind of underlooked. And then on the Washington stuff, I really don't have a read. I would rather play Logan Thomas than the wide receivers, to be quite honest, just because we've seen in game script when they get behind, he gets all that, the fourth quarter, he gets like the dink and dunk stuff and kind of makes his way there. But like I said, I like the Brandon Cooks call a lot. He's a guy that I'll be looking for tomorrow. And then I think one of the Green Bay wide receivers, whether it's Reed, Dobbs, Dontavian Wicks, we'll see if he plays. He's kind of gotten an uptick in playing time, and he kind of had a decent game last week just to kind of make the lineups work. I'm kind of interested there. But like I said, just the main statement is I think a lot of these mid-tier guys are going to go under-owned.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was looking at specifically the Seattle guys, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. You can throw on San Francisco a little bit. That's the way you're going to attack them, obviously. And, they're going to be trailing. They're going to be throwing. So I think, both DK Metcalf and Lockett are guys that I like. It's funny because I don't really like Geno, but just garbage time points and, you could see either DK or Lockett getting there without Geno,
right.
If you have like a Dak stack, right? You got a Dak and a Lamb and then you got Lockett. So, that's going to be more optimal most likely than a Geno stack would. So yeah, I like that. I do like Green Bay. I'm glad you mentioned them. Those wide receivers, some of the cheaper options, Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs, Jaden Reed. These guys are all kind of seeing similar target share, except for, Romeo Dobbs has been the guy on the season because, Watson missed quite a few games and whatnot. But last week it was Christian Watson with 18% target share and then Romeo Dobbs and Jaden Reed. So yeah, I think you gotta get some of those guys in there as well. Jaden Reed is one of my favorite pay down options this week at 4,200. And then as far as Washington, and because we like Sam Howell, that's one of the reasons why I really like Sam Howell is because the stacking options are really cheap. Like his most expensive option is Terry McLaurin, who's only 5,400. We got Curtis Samuel at 3,600, just incredibly cheap. And I think that's the kind of the perfect bring back with Dak stacks, really.
Yeah, it's been hard with Washington. They've spread the ball out so much that
they have.
You can't pinpoint where it's going to go. Every guy, it just seems like somebody new each week. But one other guy I do want to bring up, JSN. The 49ers lost their, pretty much all pro safety this week. Was playing really well. And I just think he would be another, kind of late or under cheap guys, what I'm trying to say, that can kind of get there. I'm not a DK Metcalf guy. I say it every year. I would rather play Lockett than DK Metcalf. But I think JSN has a chance to kind of get there. And, if he needs to be the bring back to your Brock Purdy stacks.
For sure. I love DK Metcalf when Russell Wilson was the quarterback. His upside was a lot higher a couple of years ago. For sure. Especially that one year that I think it was 2020 when he just That
Just going
offense
off.
cooked that year. Yeah. Yeah.
Just
For
going off.
sure. Well, let's go to tight end and then kind of wrap this up. So, I know you have a flag plant, so I will let you go ahead and get to it.
Yep. I really like George Kittle in this spot. He has cooked Seattle in the past. I think he is a way to get different in tournaments, and kind of want to go over this. When you're building your lineup, you're obviously going to play McCaffrey. You're going to play, one of the top wide receivers. You're probably not going to pay up for tight end. Usually tight end is the one that kind of gets cut. If George Kittle has his, monster blow up game, let's say 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, which is in his realm of possibilities, I don't see any other tight end on this slate getting that. I thought Sam Laporta, if at the beginning of the year when there was not any Jameson Williams, when Jahmyr Gibbs wasn't really a part of the game plan, he could probably get there, but I just don't think he will. Logan Thomas would be the other guy. Jake Ferguson, he might be able to, but George Kittle has kind of gone into his hot zone right now. He's got 400 yards over the last 4 games. He's been a top 10 tight end the last 4 weeks.
Yeah.
I just really like this spot, and I think at a slate where things you're trying to get a little bit different, I think paying up for George Kittle ends up making perfect sense. And I think if he does the George Kittle smash game, I think that's, it'd be really hard to come back from just because everybody will have ownership on CD, Amon Ra. I mean, you're really banking on a dart throw to kind of make up the production there.
Love it. Love it. And, with double tight end in play, obviously, Kittle is obviously the top guy at tight end. And, the other guys that I really like are Sam Laporta. Now, the one concern with Laporta is, he's seen a little bit of reduction in targets with both David Montgomery and Gibbs on the field, which makes sense because, they can run the ball in the red zone. They can, throw to Gibbs quite a bit. He's got more at the same target share as Laporta last week. So, but I think Laporta would be the other guy that I'd like. He's averaged like 12.5 points on DraftKings this season. Obviously, Ferguson is a stacking option with Dak.
Yep.
Love me some Ferguson. He's got about a 15% target share on the season, which is pretty much all you can ask for a tight end. So,
yeah.
And then, as you mentioned earlier, Logan Thomas is a guy that I like as well, just because he's cheap, kind of as a bring back or just even as a one-off or, stacking piece with Sam Howell.
Yeah. I will say, especially on FanDuel, Tucker Kraft is 4,300.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next guy ends up being like Logan Thomas at 5,200. I think a lot of people will play Tucker Kraft just to kind of open up salary. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. I don't think, especially in tournaments, I don't think a lot of people are going to play George Kittle. And then even if you're playing the Brock Purdy stack, I think people are going to play Christian McCaffrey and then the wide receivers. And George Kittle kind of goes underlooked. He will obviously have a little bit of ownership on a 3-game slate, but like I said, I'm just kind of banking on him having the monster game, and then it kind of be hard to kind of come back on, try to catch up. So I do like Logan Thomas. I think he can get 10 points. You hope he falls into the end zone. Jake Ferguson, especially on FanDuel, he's priced up a little bit more. He was like a 5K guy. Now he's 6,100. And then it's $400 more for Sam Laporta at 6,500. So I would rather play Kittle, and then I'll play Logan Thomas, and then if I need to punt, I'll play Tucker Kraft.
Love it, love it. Well, let's go ahead and look at defense real quick. Wrap it up. So kind of the contrarian defense that no one wants to play is going to be the Commanders at 2,500. So Stoneman. You never know. They could return a punt, return a kickoff, end up being in the nuts. Crazy things happen. Running back fumbles, scoop and run, whatever it may be. I like to spread out my exposures to defenses. I don't go all in on any one defense because it's so high variance. So that's your pay down option. Obviously, the top options in the good matchups are going to be the Cowboys going against Washington because that game could go so many ways, right? It could be really ugly for Washington, and Dallas could just trounce like they did last week against the Panthers. So that
we've
would be
also seen. I was going to say real quick, we've also
yeah,
seen the Cowboys defense put up 30 points. So you
yeah,
would hate to not play
yeah,
Cowboys, and then you can't catch up that way either.
exactly. I say get a good amount of exposure to all these defenses. Um, and then obviously the 49ers, I really like them as well, just because their pass rush is just insane now. They got that guy from what was his name from Washington? I'm blanking now.
Chase
Uh,
Young?
Chase Young, yeah. So they already had a really good rush defense, and they added Chase Young, and they're healthy. They got all their pieces back, so they can totally come out with a lead and really get after Geno and create some turnovers. So I like them as well as my other defense pay up option.
They're honestly, probably going to be my favorite outside of Dallas. I don't think the Seahawks offense has been honestly really good compared to last year. They've had a lot of red
Mhm.
zone inefficiencies, and we know Geno's hurt. Let's say if he gets hurt again, he has like a triceps injury. We
Yeah,
kind of saw in the NFC Championship where Brock Purdy couldn't throw the ball. Let's say something happens with Geno and they get Drew Lock, and then they get the sacks and they get the pick six, and then that's the way to get the 20 to 30 points. One other defense I do want to point out is the Lions going up against the Green Bay offense that's just kind of snake written with injuries. I don't think they have the ceiling as the 49ers or the Cowboys do, but they are a little bit cheaper, and I can see that game kind of going sideways too.
absolutely. Well, Jameson, do you have a stack that your favorite stack? Let's just do like a favorite stack and kind of your contrarian, silly for the millie kind of stack.
I don't know how contrarian's going to be, but I feel like I'm just all in on the 49ers. And
Yeah,
I will do Purdy. I will play Christian McCaffrey. I'll play Kittle, and I'll probably play Debo Samuel. Um, I don't hate if you can. I'm not sure you can do it on FanDuel, but if you could play all five, just because the offense is so concentrated, if you get just the 49ers blow up game and they all kind of get there, and then you can have a bring back with one of the wide receivers, and then you can still play around with some stuff on the other side. Let's say if you think Dallas's offense kind of fails where they don't get there. Um, I played a lineup, or I tested a lineup earlier that had David Montgomery with my 49er stack. So if David Montgomery kind of has the blow up with the 49ers offense going off, I think it could get there, especially in this 3-game slate. And then the only other thing I brought up earlier, if you want to get really different, I think Jordan Love stacks to where you can fit all your studs in, I think is viable too. But my favorite is going to be the 49ers tomorrow.
I like that. Yeah, the stack I'm going to the most is obviously going to be Dak and Lamb, but I'm going to double stack it with Cooks or Ferguson. I'd switch off, get some exposure to both of those guys as the second piece in that stack. But my contrarian one, like I said, Sam Howell. I really like Sam Howell with his cheap receiving options. I even think you can stack him with Brian Robinson, Curtis Samuel, just because he's so cheap. So I think if you play it that way, you can use Lamb as a bring back, and you can just get different with it in all different kinds of ways. Just because that stack is cheap. So
Yep. I was going to
I
say
like it.
you can do Lamb and you can do Cooks too. I mean, you can kind
Yeah,
of don't be afraid to kind of concentrate on one game and you can get a piece or two elsewhere. But if you think you have a game that you really like above the rest, I mean, I have no problem. Like I
yeah.
said, I'll play like a 49ers lineup basically and might have a piece or two elsewhere. But I really do like the Sam House stuff, especially if you can hit on the wide receiver. If you can hit on that, I think that's the way to go, and that's a way to get different too.
I agree, and I really like the fact that when there's a 3-game slate, if you overstack one game and it goes off, you are probably going to win a lot of money on that game. So just don't be afraid to take a chance and overstack a game that you really like.
Yeah,
So
I was
those
gonna say,
be my final
I was
thoughts.
just, I was just gonna bring up real quick, like with my 49er stack. Let's say if Debo and like if I do Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, I played both wide receivers and Kittle, and let's say if one of the wide receivers doesn't get there, Well, if the other guys go off, it'll be all right. It's not like a death sentence necessarily. You might not hit the total nuts, but you'll definitely be in the money if, let's say, Debo goes off and Ayuk only gets like 10 points, something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, man. All kinds of ways you can go with it to win the money. So that's going to wrap it up. Best of luck. I think, like we said before when we started the show, it's a fun slate. Have fun with it. Don't be afraid to go off the walls to differentiate yourself. It's a 3-game slate. You're not trying to split that top prize with 10, 20 other people. So, be contrarian. Fade the chalk if you can.
There we go. So I hope everybody has a good Thanksgiving. Like I said, don't blow your load too early. Don't get stuck in the food coma at like 11 o'clock. Can't move the rest of the day. But everybody have fun with it. Go win some money, and we'll see you guys all next week.
Yeah, we will be back on next Wednesday for the Showdown Slate Breakdown. And of course, I will be back on Friday doing a little bit of underdog draft strategy for this main slate that we have on Sunday. So best of luck. We'll see you later.
Have a good one.